What a way to start my session on Manor Farm on the linear complex. You've joined me down here today. I've got 48 hours left and I'm off to a flyer. I actually got down last night, got the rods out for about 7 o'clock in the evening. There's a few fish about, a lot at the other end, but I couldn't really get on them. But much to my surprise, I had 3 in the night, up to 24 pounds, and this one's just tanked off, and she's tipped the scales at 31 pounds 6 ounces. So yeah, 30 pounder on the first morning and 2 nights left to go. So hopefully we'll have a few more of these. We'll talk you through some tactics on how I would approach day ticket waters, in particular linear fisheries Manor Farm, and we'll have a closer look at the bait that I use as well. So yeah, nice start. We'll get this one back and hopefully there'll be some more to come. Right, so here we are, Manor Farm. Probably, well, it is my favourite lake on the linear complex. So I arrived last night, I've had a good look round, and there was a lot of fish showing sort of over in the shallow area, just off the no fishing point, loads of them. Like, I've probably seen 30, 40 fish. They were kind of showing one after another, so I knew that that is where I wanted to be. So I've had a wander around, and there's a guy in the swim and asking when he's off, and he's staying for a few days, so that's off the cards. I think one thing I always do when I'm on linear is you turn up, if you can find some fish. It's always fairly busy down here, but you've got to remember there's always people coming and going. So it's always, if you see fish, it's always worth asking when the person's going. And unfortunately I couldn't get in that swim last night or today because he's staying. But I've dropped in over here in the car park swim, and it's a swim I actually fished about 4 weeks ago now and had quite a lot of fish. I had a really good hit out of it. It's been off form since. I think I only know of 1 or 2 fish that he's done in the last month or so. It just seems like I was down last week and a lot of fish were up in that shallow area again. So anyway, I've dropped in here, thought it's got to be worth it for the night, and I could potentially move today. And I've dropped straight onto the spot that I fished a few weeks ago, just under 100 yards range. That trip that I fished it, there's a nice spot that comes up fairly shallow in front of there, but it was all weeded over, not real thick weed, but only like, I don't know, a few inches off the deck, but it wasn't clear at all. There was nothing clear. But I put quite a bit of bait out throughout the session. I had quite a lot of fish off of it a month ago, and I noticed towards the end of the session I was starting to get a real hard drop, and although I didn't plummet again, I got the feeling that it was getting a lot cleaner. What you kind of find with the type of baits that I use, the particle baits, once you get them feeding on it, they're grubbing around so much, they rip up all the weed and quite easily can polish off a spot. And when I've got into this swim, I flicked the marker float out to the area and just dragged it back, and it was absolutely crystal clean gravel. A complete contrast to the start of my session a month ago in here. So I've cast around the spot, had a few casts, and the spot is now quite big, and I didn't pick up any weed at all. It was just gravel, 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 so I knew it had been fed on. So I thought that'll do. I always like to fish a nice clear spot, so I've dropped in here. I've probably put about 15, 20 spod or spoms out over the spot and got 3 rods on it just before darkness. As lights come up, I've had a good look around. I've seen a few fish again up in the shallow water and a couple of fish right over the far side in front of the Whitney Point, but nothing in front of me. And then all of a sudden the rod's ripped off out the blue. Once it's popped up, I could see it was a pretty decent fish actually, and as I've got it in the net, I didn't think too much of it, but I knew it was a half decent one. It was only when I've gone to lift out the water that I realised that it was probably a bit bigger than I thought. She went onto the scales at 31 pounds and 6 ounces, and a 30 pounder on my first night. So yeah, so that's where we're up to at the moment. I'm going to keep a good eye out today. I'm going to stay put in here for the day, but if I see quite a lot of fish elsewhere and a swim comes available, then I'm not going to neglect to move. You know, it's always worth moving on to showing fish, but we'll see how the day pans out. Well, it's been quiet for 3 or 4 hours now. I've not seen anything show in front of me at all. Just a few tension short and just completely out of the blue, and it's tanked off. Don't mind if you're not seeing him if the rod's tanking off every few hours. Well, mint, that'll do. Probably the smallest fish I've had, well, it is the smallest fish I've had out of Manor this year, but still was a fish, and one closer to my next big one. In my opinion, baiting strategy is probably one of the most important factors of piecing together a good catch of fish on linear, or certainly on Manor Farm anyway. For me, on this lake, it slightly differs to some of the other lakes on the complex. The fish are a little bit more wary and a little bit more spooky of the spod on here, but having said that, they do like their bait. So what I found over a number of years of fishing here, when you do spod, at times they tend to back off, particularly if they're already feeding on the spot. So what I tend to do is I put a fairly decent amount of bait in to start with, maybe 15, 20 of the big spoms, and then I sit on it. I won't top up. If I haven't had a bite, I don't put in any more bait. I just sit tight. I've got 3 rigs on it, so there's no way the fish are going to come in and clean all of my bait up without me getting a pickup. It's just not going to happen. So I don't top up after every fish. On some of the other lakes I do, but on here I don't top up after every fish. Like I said, if you start spomming overfeeding fish, they will back off and take quite a while to come back. So I tend to leave it and try and get 3 or 4 maybe bites before I top up, but that all depends, because sometimes your feeding spell, you might only get 1 or 2 bites and then it goes quiet. So I've had a few bites this morning. I've not topped up. It's probably been an hour and a half now since I last had a bite. So it's time to put a bit more bait in. And again, I'll just top up now with about 10 spods or 10 spoms, and then I will just leave it. I won't put in any more bait if I'm not catching. One of the common mistakes I see on linear as a whole is people constantly drumming bait out, and what's the point? If you're not getting bites, you don't want to keep putting bait out. If you've got a decent bed of bait in there, sometimes it just pays to just sit back and be patient and sit on it, and the bites will come. If you put it in the right place and if you're on the fish, the bites will come. You don't need to keep forcing it and keep baiting, because that's not going to do you any favours. So I'm going to get a bit of bait out now, just get a bit of top up into the swim, see if I can induce a take or 2 this afternoon, and then we'll sit down and have a closer look at the mix that I use on linear. I've played around with loads of different spod mixes and spod mix ingredients over the years, but the one thing that has always remained a constant is the base of my mix, and for that it's always hemp, sweet corn and 10mm boilies. That's something I've used ever since I started carp fishing. There's lots of other ingredients that you can add to the mix to customise it, make it your own, to give it a bit of a boost, but those 3 items are something that I would never make a spod mix without, and that works really well on linear, and everywhere I've ever fished it, to be honest, there's not anywhere I've ever been that it hasn't worked. Hemp, I always like to cook it up fresh. You can get some cheap stuff from the pet shops, and I wouldn't really recommend that. The biggest thing you need from hemp is for it to split, and for all the little white seeds to be showing through once they're split. So I just soak it for 24 hours, bring it to the boil for 20 minutes, and as long as you get all of the white bits coming out on the hemp, then you know it's cooked. And also you can just crush it between your finger and thumb, and if it crushes, you know that it's well cooked as well. All the juice that sort of leaks out is really oily once you've cooked it, so again, that adds to the attraction. The hemp makes up the main bulk of my mix always. Small particles, spreads out on the bottom, keeps them grubbing around for ages, keeps them coming back, and it really is one of those particles that just keeps the fish in your swim. Sweet corn, Tin of sweet corn, always chuck a tin of sweet corn into the spod mix. Visual factor, it's bright, they can see it, it's sweet, fish love sweet things, and it's nice and soft and easily digestible, so no brainer. Decent quality boilie, always got to get a decent quality boilie in the mix. Again, I like to keep it small, so I go for the 10 millers. All my particles are small, so 10 mil boilies, it just spreads out. You get more boilies per kilo on 10 millers. They spread out more, they go a longer way, so that keeps the fish grubbing around a lot more. I also fish a small hook bait, so all my items are small hook bait, and that just works for me. I've been doing really well on the live system this year. It complements the mix that I'm using very well, and it just seems to be producing fish after fish for me. One key ingredient that I've been using this year to customize my mix is roasted peanut chops. Now these really do smell gorgeous, and they're all chopped up, so again, all small bits that are going to just keep the fish grubbing around for ages. Carp absolutely love nuts, and these are roasted and they smell gorgeous. You need to prepare these when they're dry. They're hard, and all I do, I prepare them the same as I prepare my hemp. Just soak it for 24 hours, bring it to the boil and let it simmer for about 20 minutes, and then they go nice and soft, and you can see they're really creamy, so they release loads of juices. And again, when you spod them, lots of oils release out of the nuts. They smell absolutely gorgeous, and the carp just love them, so that is something that I've been using that really complements the live system as well. If I had to choose one liquid to go in with the spod mix, it would be the roasted nut extract. Again, keeping it very much nut based. Carp love nuts, and that is a really good extract. It's quite thick, but once you put it in with a few of the hemp juice, with a bit of the hemp juice and with some of the juice out of the nuts, it thins out, and it really makes the spod mix smell gorgeous and adds another dimension to it. So that's a closer look at some of the key ingredients that I believe will make a spod mix that will catch carp absolutely anywhere. We're away again. Oh, feels like a half decent fish, taking a bit of line. I just topped up some bait probably an hour and a half ago, so it'd gone quiet for an hour and a half. Put probably 10 spoms of bait out. And then we've just had a twitchy take that's just pulled up tight, and we're in. Wow, another immaculate common from Manor. 24.5 pound. Always pleased with that. Big bar of gold scales. Really nice proportions actually. Big belly on it, probably pre-spawning. I'd say another month or so and they'll be ready to start spawning. But yeah, came just in about an hour and a half after topping up with a bit of bait. See if I can catch a couple more and then put some more bait in. just had another 1 toner and it's fish on. It's kiting around up on the top, right out in the middle at the moment. Feels like not a bad fish, but to be honest, they all do. They're all good fish in here. So many sort of big fish. The average size is probably 25 pound in here now. So we're hoping that if I can keep catching a few, maybe, just maybe, one of those proper big chunks may turn up at some point. We're in the game, we're catching them, so you never know. There's a nice mirror, a nice scaly one. My heart stopped for a second. I've seen some big scales come up and I thought for a split second it was Kempy's. It's Kempy's linear. That's the one I've been after. We've got Kempy's linear in the net, live for the camera, and that is a chunk. Oh dear, I don't really know what to say. Kempy's linear, 48 pounds and 4 ounces. In my opinion, one of the nicest fish in the country. Just look at the scale pattern on it. It's an absolute beast. Kempy's linear one last time. Thanks for the memories. What a absolute awesome creature. So pleased to have caught this fish. Now let's get her back and make someone else's dream come true. Back she goes. Look at the width of it.
Go on, friend.
Well, it's the morning after the night before. We had a hectic one yesterday. It was mental. I just still sort of can't believe exactly what's happened. Basically, I've caught Kempy's linear, which is the one that I've been after for a long time. I had a few more fish after that in the evening. Really nice scaly 28.5 pounder. I think I had another small one straight after that one as well. And then I only had the one, it went a bit quiet in the night, I only had the one. I had a 28 pounder, which I'd done a few night shots of, a few photos and slipped her back. And I've just topped up with a bit of bait this morning. It's a bit of a miserable morning, nice carp fishing conditions, not really a lot showing, the odd fish sticking his head out, but nothing anywhere near me. So I think there's a chance of a couple of fish today, but to be honest, I've put a lot of time and effort into this lake over the years. After, you know, trying to catch that fish, that's the big one. It's one of the nicest fish I've ever seen, but you know, bar none, it is incredible. So it kind of feels like I'm done now. You know, I was supposed to be on for a couple more nights, one night at least, maybe 2 nights, but to be honest, I'm just absolutely shattered. I've had the fish of my dreams, and it's almost like that's it now. It's time to say goodbye to Manor. So I think I'm going to give it a few more hours, maybe the rest of the day. I'm here, I'm just going to chill out and just sort of kick back and sort of reflect on what's happened yesterday. So yeah, it's been an exciting session, fishing me dreams, and I suppose I don't think we got a chance to look at the rig, so this is it. This is the rig that has produced Kempy's linear for me. Basically, the Ronnie rig has been highly sort of documented in the press, certainly in the last 6 months or so, I guess. And it's something I tried a few times last year with a few different hook patterns. I never really got on with it. Had some strange hook holds, lost a couple of fish and kind of just sort of rubbished it and thought it wasn't that great. But I like the principle of it. The idea of having the swivel, which means you need less putty, and the extension of the sort of curve of the hook. And this year I gave it a go. ESP have got some new cryogen hooks out in their curve shank pattern, and they're really strong, up to 30% stronger than any other hook on the market, and they're mega sharp as well. So I started using them probably about 6 weeks ago on the Ronnie rig, and Christ, I've been absolutely blown away by the results. I've had a ridiculous amount of fish in the last 6 weeks on there, and I've not lost many on it either. Up until this session, I think I was up to about 51 fish hooked, 50 fish landed. Hook bait wise, same as what I've been catching all session on. Little yellow Northern Special pop up, a 12 miller, just on a little rig ring on the Ronnie rig, and a tiny bit of putty just to make it so that it sinks down slowly. Also, one thing I use is a streamliner rig boom over the lead clip, and that basically kicks the rig away from the lead every time. So even if fish sort of picks it up and spits it out, it always resets itself. So it's a really good rig, you know. And I use a tungsten loaded boom as well. It's semi-stiff, so again, it's the perfect sort of stiffness to kick the rig away from the lead and sort of straighten it out every time. And it just works. So I don't know who Ronnie is, but great rig. Thanks for bringing it to us. And yeah, I think I will be using it a fair lot more in the future. Looking back at the history of Kempy's, it's not actually the first time that I caught this fish. I have actually caught it, funnily enough, way back in, I think it was September 2003, and it was 27 pound back then. And I remember quite a lot about that capture actually. I remember when I caught it, we didn't have digital cameras and all that back then, so it was all in prints, and I remember catching a couple of nice fish, and that was one of them. And I remember winding in, driving to Whitney and getting all the prints exposed and coming back. And I remember showing Chris Blunt at the time, who's fishery manager, and I showed him the pictures of this linear that was 27 pound, and he said at the time he hadn't seen it. And I'm not saying it hadn't been caught before, but of course back then photos weren't as easily shared around, so it wasn't a really well-known fish, but it was absolutely gorgeous. At the time I was fishing right over in Peg 5. It's a big double swim now, but back then it was barely a swim. In fact, it wasn't a swim the winter before. I remember Lee Collins had just cut out a few reeds and just made a little gap in the reeds so that we could fish it. And of course, back then in 2003, the lake was a lot different to what it is today. It was a lot smaller. In fact, the morning I caught Kempy's back then in 2003, they just started extracting the gravel to extend the lake. so it used to be a lot smaller. I remember from the point over on my right hand side, this where we're fishing now just used to be nowhere near the lake. The lake used to come right out into the middle, or the bank did, and then cut across, and all that was quite a narrow channel along the bank. And I remember sort of 7 in the morning, the digger would come in and swing a massive bucket out, and it was smashing it in the water and just extracting the gravel and just tipping it round and tipping it behind him and building piles. And that was the start of it, and they extracted all of this out. So probably the spot where I actually caught Kempy's this session, I reckon I've got photographs of them of 2003 when they were extracting the gravel, and where the digger is probably around about the spot where I've caught Kempy's from today. So yeah, got a lot of history behind that fish. And I remember a couple of years after I had it, probably 2005, 2006, my mate, good friend Cliff Kemp, who is named after, caught the fish again over in the brown swim. I was on Horseshoe at the time, and he rang me and he said, Kev, I've got a 31-pound linear, not quite sure what fish it is. And I drove across to see him the following day and had a look at the photos and that. And of course it was the linear that I'd had sort of a couple of years before. So it was the first capture, known capture of it being over 30 pounds. So hence the name Kempy's linear. So that's where it came from. I've not actually seen that fish on the bank other than when I had it in 2003 since then. So once I had it in the net this time, that's the first time I've sort of set my eyes on it again since then. And I'm not really one for recaptures, but when it's 21 pound bigger than when you had it, God knows how many years ago, it was well worth catching. Well, there's always time for one more, isn't there? Well, this one is a very nice way to sign off on Manor. A needle's width under 30 pound, and brings a conclusion to an epic number of years on Manor for me. Obviously catching the big one yesterday, it's time to move on to pastures new. So I'm just about to pack up now. So thanks very much for the memories, Manor, and on to our next venue.
My soul beats the sound.